I'm going to start us with a quick prayer. I'm going to introduce you all to Dr. Gordon, and then I'm going to turn it over to her. So would you join with me in a moment of prayer? Gracious God, I do thank you for our opportunity to come together, be in conversation, to learn, open our hearts and our minds that we continue to be who you call us to be. Amen. Okay, I know most all of you have had an opportunity to see the piece we have put out from the foundation, but let me just share a few of those highlights again. Dr. Gordon is a board certified family medicine physician and is the chief medical officer for Think Whole Person Healthcare. For the record, my wife is a family physician there at Think as well, so we do have connections. Dr. Gordon has previously worked for Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Nebraska and CHI Health Clinic, where she also served as a member of the clinic leadership team with oversight of several provider clinics. She is passionate about patient education, support of childhood health improvement initiatives, and the health of our community by promoting wellness programs, preventative screening, nutrition, and physical activity. She's a graduate of Temple University, a distinguished alum of the University of Nebraska, Omaha, with an executive MBA program, where she completed that MBA in 2012 and has recently completed a master's in finance with Bellevue University. Dr. Gordon, thank you for joining us, and I will turn it over to you.
You bet. Thank you, Matt. Hello, everyone, and thank you for inviting me and welcoming me into your space. Thank you for the prayer, because Matt, if you hadn't prayed, I would have asked to pray. So thank you for doing that. We are indeed in a troubling year. There are so many things that I think we could probably all look back at biblical scriptures and say, I wonder if, or I wonder if. And at the end of the day, we're faced with a public health issue that is impacting all of us. We do want to continue to offer the value that prayer and church services do, because not only does it have the benefit of giving people the opportunity to still connect with others, because there's a tremendous amount of isolation right now when we're asking folks to stay at home and to socially distance, and so they're not able to visit with friends and family. And I'm guessing as leaders for your organizations, you're probably getting calls from your parishioners and members around maybe some personal sadness or depression or a sense of isolation. I mean, it's a big deal. And so I understand the need to continue to want to offer those in-person services. And so today, my objective is really to just present a tidbit and to open up the remainder of the time for your questions. As you heard, I am very passionate about getting questions that are burning, as well as using this time to clear up any confusion that may exist today with the questions that you may have. As a source of reference, I consistently use the Centers for Disease Control. Why? Because they have been our leader, albeit they started a bit late with their recommendations. We acknowledge that, but we also know that following these recommended guidelines for decreasing the transmission of COVID to other individuals has shown benefit in different parts of the country. We also see and have seen that trend reversed, and we've seen the curve going upward in the Sun Belt region of the country, and it is now impacting the Midwest. There are many potential reasons for that, but what we have seen globally is the value of wearing masks. Mask, hand hygiene makes a huge difference. There are obviously different schools of thought on the value of wearing a mask. I don't think anyone would contradict proper hand hygiene, but I understand folks at this point not being sure if a mask will make a difference. Here in Nebraska, I'm not sure where everyone else is. Here in Nebraska, we've been very fortunate, and our numbers have not been quite as high. Our neighboring state, Iowa, has not seen the same. Their numbers are in multiples compared to ours, and so we know there's an opportunity there. So the CDC does have a standard set of recommendations regarding gatherings and events. I think the first set is avoid the gathering and event if at all possible. The second is if an organization does choose to, and in this case, offer in-person services, we know that the lowest risk would be virtual services. Many churches and places of worship are already offering that. I would recommend continuing that program if you are not already offering it. The second is to consider that the presence or having those in-person services will increase your risk, particularly as you have more and more bodies enter your places of worship. And so how to mitigate against that? Many houses of worship have multiple entrances. And so how do you monitor that? You can limit entrance into the facility through one opening so that you have a controlled entrance and a controlled exit. So having either signage on the floors or on areas where individuals or little ones cannot get their hands on to direct folks. So enter only this way, exit only that way. I would recommend that having separate entrance and exit options. The other thing is at your entrance options, if you have the resources, I would encourage you to consider doing temperature checks at the entrance of your houses of worship. Unfortunately, what we're seeing, not just here in Nebraska, but across the country, we have variable amounts of willingness of people to participate. If your church members find that checking a temperature at the front door is too intrusive, I would argue that what we are seeing in healthcare, and this is just awful, we are seeing individuals who will state they do not have a temperature. And in fact, once they're in the appointment with a provider, indeed they do. And indeed they've had exposure. And so now we are concerned about how many people have they exposed along the way getting into this space for their appointment. There are many, many, many more individuals who are quite honest and will say yes or no to those screening questions. I would also encourage you to consider asking screening questions. I was just looking for my screening question list. So the standard screening questions that we ask in our facility, and Matt, I'm happy to share that with you. And I can actually send a copy home with Margot today, and I'll send an e-copy as well, so that you can share it broadly with the group if you would like.
That would be perfect. Yep, you send it with her, and I'll email everyone either tomorrow or Monday. You will have it.
Yep, because the point is we are in this together, and there's nothing proprietary about these questions at all. So feel free to use it in your places of worship. So key questions: are you a first responder, a healthcare worker, or an employee or child at an adult care facility? Do you attend or use a child or adult care facility? As you all know, as a healthcare worker, I'm a high risk. My children are at higher risk because I'm a healthcare worker. If you work or have relatives in a long-term care setting, as you've heard in the news, those particular settings seem to have more patients that are testing positive for COVID. Additional questions, which may be more intrusive for your members, but we use here in our healthcare facility. Have you tested positive for COVID-19 at any time in the past? Have you been in direct contact with anyone with a confirmed positive COVID test? And do you have any symptoms? Do you currently have any of these symptoms? Fever, chills, cough, and you'll see these questions. And you'll see that we've highlighted these questions in green and red. Green is go, you're good to go. Red, please stop. If upon deploying these questions, you find that an individual has red, of course you would not want these individuals entering into the house of worship. You would want to identify an isolation area right away at the entrance of your facility. It should be away from the crowd. You should have some set up for masking. I would recommend that you ask and have all your attendees wear masks to church services. It is so important. The other common question is, well, if they have a mask, they won't be able to sing. Well, they can still pray. And God will understand. At this time, they're not singing. And certainly I don't mean to offend anyone by saying that. But we know that this is spread through respiratory droplets. We know that coughing, sneezing, laughing, talking, all are potential ways to spread this virus. It's highly infectious. So asking the screening questions, consider taking temperatures at the front door. You may even reduce the number of questions that are being asked. You probably have medical personnel as your members. They would be a great resource for you to use, because you know better than I do the culture within your particular congregation and what the temperature is for this list of questions. And the point is to keep your members safe and visitors to your facility. So the temperature check, questions, the isolation area, virtual services. For in-person services, depending on the capacity of your building and the ability to have multiple services in the same day, because I know that increases the amount of work that each of you would face. I would recommend, if you absolutely want to, you must have your attendees wear masks at all times. If folks are going to sing, they're going to have to do that with the mask on, but I would not recommend that. I would also recommend that you plan on having truly 6 feet apart. And if it's a family, you've got to keep that family unit together in one spot. So as we think about churches and how seating is arranged, right, there's usually just horizontal seating, which means in theory, you would have to probably skip 2 to 3 rows in between families or individuals to allow appropriate seating, and then you'd want to skip 4 or more chairs to get the 6 feet apart. And so the number of attendees that you can truly accommodate is going to decrease drastically. You may only be able to accommodate, at maybe 10 to 25% of your congregation, again, depending on the size and the capacity of your facility. In terms of preparation at the entryway, having hand sanitizer available, both at the as folks are entering the building, as folks are entering the synagogue, and then into the worship center, and then within the actual sanctuary as well. So you'd like to have multiple things. I would not recommend handing out loose papers. I would not recommend having Kleenex sitting around loosely. Absolutely, if people need Kleenex, there's a place that it can be retrieved from and offered. But we know that leaving it sitting out with hands, you could be transmitting that as well. So hand hygiene is extremely important. So staggered spacing, temperature checks, questions, virtual services, cleaning and disinfecting, very important. How would you manage that? You would want to have, depending on the seating, some worship centers have completely hard surface seating. Others have a combination of fabric and hard surface. So you would need some sort of disinfectant spray that you would absolutely have your entire congregation out of the place of worship, and then would allow you time to spray in between. So about 30 minutes or so in between to allow it to dry. So folks would not have wet clothes while they're there. I would strongly recommend gloves for your staff members who are there, volunteers or paid staff members who are there to help direct the flow of worshipers as they're attending services. They should have gloves at all times. If you have any sort of music program within the church at this point in time, again, if it, the best manner would be not to have groups congregate. And so if there's an ability to accommodate virtual, each musician playing virtually and perhaps pre-recording that, if the church has that capacity, we absolutely want to reduce the crowd gathering. We absolutely need to socially distance, absolutely have to wear masks, and begin some sort of screening process and disinfection process before services, between services, and after, including door handles and so forth. Any sort of treats, trinkets, loose leaf paper, or takeaways that folks are accustomed to getting, I would strongly recommend removing those at this point in time. So I've given you quite a bit, which I'm certain that based on the safety protocols, I'm guessing that you've all established that you probably have some of these already. I'll open up the floor at this point to questions and see where we get.
Good morning. My name is Nick Baker. I'm serving two churches in northeast Nebraska, in Wayne and Carroll, and we've been blessed to have lower numbers in that community than other parts of Nebraska, which is lower than other parts of the country. So very happy there, but obviously still want to be aware. So you referenced the cleaning for soft surfaces as well as hard. We have accommodation, as many do. Is there a recommendation that you've been able to find? And I'll pose the question to those on the call as well. I've not been able to find a product that is recommended for disinfecting those soft surfaces. So if there's a recommendation that people use or the closest we can get, we are of a size where we will have just one service and then the sanctuary will sit idle for the next 6 days. We'll still have a team that comes in and cleans afterwards, after the service, but then it will be empty. So I don't know if there's a product we can use or something close. Pose the question.
Yep, you bet. Thank you for asking that. In the healthcare world, we use Glybet, which is really honestly hard to find at this point in time. If you can find Lysol spray, that would be great. I know that is also very, very difficult to find. What we had used early during the pandemic was an alcohol distilled water mixture, because we knew that there's some bacteriostatic property to alcohol, hence the reason why you can use hand sanitizers. We were using that for surface cleaning as well, and I can get some information over to Matt around what the dilution ratio is that we used, and hopefully that will help you.
Great, thank you. And what was the name of the product you mentioned at the very beginning? Glybet or?
Glybet, Glybet. It's a spray. It's a healthcare disinfectant spray. It's been rather difficult to find, so I just happened to find a few containers of Lysol wipes, and I hadn't seen them in 4 months or so the other day. So
right, yeah, we've struggled as well. So we'll keep looking, but that's helpful to have a couple, and I see some folks are sharing in the chat as well. So thank you very much.
You bet.
Along that same line, the churches I serve in Shelby and Osceola, which is Nebraska. Anyway, you all know where it is. The controversy is that we do have some nurses, retired nurses and everything, and from what they're reading, the virus does not live past so many days. And I've heard from 24 hours to 6 days, and they're getting very vocal in arguing with one another. And I mean, not in church, but so we're not. Once we're done with our services, there's nothing else going on in the church at all until the following Sunday. And so there isn't a lot of cleaning. They're worried about the wood of the pews. We've removed all the cushions. So they're worried about spraying something on it. And the one church purchased a fogger that is being used in the school district and also the courthouse. And so they're going to be using that, which has its own special cleaners solution. So I just wanted, what is the true story about how many days? Because if we have a funeral on a Friday, of course we're going to want to clean before Sunday. And after next month, we'll have confirmation, and I'll be in the sanctuary with the youth. So I just love to have more information on that.
Yep, you bet. Great question. So no one medical outlet has settled on the duration that the virus can live on surfaces. Initially, the thought was they would live longer on cardboard or steel, or then maybe it was just a few minutes or maybe a few hours in the air. So it's certainly not to be subversive or to hide anything at all. There's a lot that is still not known, and honestly, as a medical community, we are learning daily. We are learning daily. What I would recommend for the single service use for the week with a congregation that can adhere to social distancing, I would absolutely recommend still disinfecting. I understand preserving the integrity of the pews, because a lot of hard work went into building those churches. Those are my favorite kinds, actually, not the ones with the synthetic chairs and cushions. A lot of love went into putting those into place. And you do need to clean those surfaces, again, because we don't know.
Okay.
We truly don't know at this point. And so you do your best. And I love that you have your nurses there. Once a nurse, always a nurse. Once a doctor, always a doctor. And so I absolutely value their input and their suggestions. I would maybe recommend for all of you, actually, if you have not already, come up with a safety protocol, and you can call it what you like, COVID safety protocol or public health response safety protocol, something global that can be applied in the future. And I go back to use a single point of reference that is objective. So it won't be Josette Gordon's point of reference or one of my other partners here in the practice. It's Centers for Disease Control. This is what they're recommending. And I'll send that link as well in that PDF document to Matt. You can reference that because it has a nice planning tool and planning sheet as well for events.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. I'm just making a list of the items that I need to send to Matt.
So I'm Stephanie, and I'm in Omaha and Benson, and my congregation, is half refugees, half not refugees. My refugees, 90% of them have a family member in a packing plant. So in the congregation as a whole, we've had at least 10 positives. We've had 2 people in the hospital. One of them has died. So it's been very real to us, and it's been very easy to convince my church people to not come.
Yep.
And we have a plan for when we come back. We're very clear we can only hold between 30 and 60 people in our large sanctuary just because of the shape of it. We know how we'd handle that. But here's my concern. I also have an 80-kid childcare in the same building. And I live with somebody who's in the College of Public Health. He researches viruses, which is not very helpful for everyday work, but
it's valuable.
It's valuable. It's good work. And I ask him what COVID is. I get a long 20-minute discourse on messenger RNA. Perfect. Right. You would love him. In 3 years, we'll have dinner together. Wonderful. With Margot.
COVID.
Right. And so I got to be part of the team of clergy that worked with Dr. Khan on best practices for coming back to church. Okay. So I feel really good about knowledge on that. We've got tape all over the whole church. Who can come in which door? Because of course it's a box. Ugh. So hardly anyone's allowed to use the bathroom. I've got all that, because HVAC, of course, was already a nightmare before this. Okay. But here's this childcare situation, and I'm just horrified that the rules for the public to me, appear to be absolutely antithetical to anything that HHS is saying about children. And so I put the kids in bubbles. I'm like, every kid's in a bubble. You are not allowed to give, adults are not allowed to give breaks to adults outside of their bubble. I mean, this is costing us money, but it's not because HHS. There is no guidance from anyone in the whole state other than apparently there's something magical about if you're under 5. And so, luckily when our first teacher tests positive, because, the crazy pastor had put tape down everywhere, we only had to quarantine 1 room of toddlers and 4 adults, And by the way, now we all know it's backdated the last time they were in the building, so the 14 days was shorter. But it's horrifying to me trying to manage this shared facility where it appears to me that the state just doesn't even care about these children that are under my care, and I feel that I have a moral, ethical obligation to care for them. It is way outside of my skill set to be able to figure out that. And now, because we have a moral imperative to help families, I'm going to have school agers on a 3-2 thing, because we have to keep 3rd graders from burning down the house. And so we're inviting them. So I'm going to have 3 floors of children, right? Because they're all in bubbles.
Yep.
And it's a split floor building. I've got, I think, 5 half floors of kids that I'm trying to keep away from anyone.
Yeah.
Anyway, what? So this whole time since March, I've been looking for any best practice involving children. I can't. So obviously I sound frustrated. I am.
Okay.
I can't find any best practices for dealing with children. And it appears to me their parents don't even care, because their parents are so overwhelmed. They're just happy to dump them on us. And it's as if our building is magical. And here's a tip, it isn't. What? Do you have any thoughts for me other than just keep praying for good luck, which is not what I think is a good theological basis for anything?
Stephanie, I love your dialogue. I
And
do.
no one can tell me yet, do we just turn off the heat in the air so the stuff doesn't circulate?
Or they can just leave the building because it'll be too hot or too cold. I'll go back to what I shared. Thank you for sharing that. And you are not alone in your challenges. As you know, the school district in various parts of the state have variable plans for the children to return to school. My children will be part of that return to school process. With respect to best practices for children, you said a few things I wanted to call out. One, best practices for children speaks to children under 5 not wearing masks or not having to wear masks. The rationale there is the potential for choking hazard. However, if you have socially distanced and they're in the appropriate spacing and you absolutely have no way around it, I would still recommend those children wearing masks. And if you can, keep the kiddos in a bubble. So if you've got 2 or 3 kiddos from the same family, I'd keep those 2 or 3 kiddos together away from other kiddos.
Oh, but Dr. Gordon Simmet, here's the thing. HHS won't let us bubble households because of the rule that you can't be in a room with people more than 18 months apart in age.
Yeah.
So we've got a family with 5 kids here and they're in 5 classrooms.
Yeah, and you won't have enough, you simply will not have enough physical space to accommodate. And short of not having the kiddos attend, you have no way of truly isolating the children. You have no way. Children that age, some schools are implementing face shields. That's not realistic for a toddler. They'll take it and hurl it across the room and cause an injury, and that causes some other concerns. The other thing that you called out is the isolation of either an adult with potential symptoms or potentially even a child with symptoms. You're not sure, or you will not know actually what the exposure is with any household coming into the sanctuary at all. I'll tell you, Stephanie, and I'll tell this group, my visceral response is not to have kiddos there in the sanctuary at all. That is my visceral response, and it gives me a bit of heartburn to share that with you, but they are so vulnerable. For worship?
We're outlying kids for worship because there's no way to contain them, and we care about them.
Yep.
And we don't want them to learn that in church.
That's right. Yep. There isn't a way, there isn't enough of a space. And honestly, if you tried to put children outside of the same family unit together, then you are looking at a gathering. You are looking at a gathering, and you are increasing the risk of transmission to a vulnerable population that we know the constellation of symptoms may not look the same as it does in an adult today. There is no one solution. I appreciate what you've done thus far with trying to separate kiddos into separate spaces as best as you can. But you also need adult supervision for each of those kids in those separate spaces as well. I'm terribly sorry I don't have a better solution other than what you've outlined.
That makes me feel better that I've not missed something obvious.
No, and you have a great resource right there in your household. So as yes, you do.
Science, it doesn't help with the real world. Trust me.
Yes, it does. And I know Ali Khan, so yes, it does.
He's not in the household. I got the PhD nerd in the household. No help at all.
That's perfect. The social distancing and the face masks, it sounds like you've done a fantastic job of protecting the youngest members of your congregation as best as you can, and trying to as much as possible reduce the number of bodies in the building. But do know that I would recommend temp checks, particularly in the pediatric population. If I'm not sure how long your services may last.
Oh, no, so these are weekday kids.
Oh, these are weekday.
Oh, sorry.
Are you doing temp checks?
5 days a week. Yeah, they're doing temp checks, and I've got kids in my building for 12 hours on weekdays.
Oh my.
No, that's what I mean. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Why? I'm like, if this is our mission, and half of our budget is this mission for this interracial, intergenerational parents who can't afford to not have their kids in childcare, or they can't pay rent, then I can't have worshipers here.
Yep, that's right.
It's the trade-off. And the rule is every room in the building can only be used by one group a week. Yep. So, no. This is a full-on childcare with Title II folks.
My office used to be at 61st and Maple there, so I think I know where you might be.
That's my horror. And it's a full-on, when we call HHS, it's a full-on childcare in a church building. They're like, oh, no, you're fine. Call us if any kids get loose. It's like, oh, okay, we'll do that. Thank you. No, those are the people with the rule that, will say, wouldn't it be better to put the 3 kids because of COVID in the same room for those 8 hours of care? They're like, no, we're going by the rules that did make sense 5 years ago. I mean, obviously you can't have a toddler trample an infant.
Right.
No, sorry. Yeah. Oh.
No worries. I thank you for clarifying that. I would, short of closing any child care facility, we need different solutions. And I think the solutions that you've described is one of the better solutions that I've heard. I understand it is absolutely not ideal. It probably requires you to wipe down the surfaces about every 30 minutes to an hour, almost like you're in an intensive care unit. Yes, so frequent cleaning of surfaces. If you do find a child is potentially exposed in the household or even there, they have to head home. What other questions are out there?
My question is about to travel or not to travel. I'm in Columbus, Nebraska. We have a lot of major industries, and some of the local folks have, or like NPPD and others have not a travel ban per se, but they say that if families or workers have traveled outside of the state, they are basically in quarantine. Because we have a number of people in those, like NPPD and some of those other ag industries, and have those policies, we adopted that policy as well. But we are getting a lot of pushback right now because that is more strict than the state and even our local health officials say. How do you respond to that? Are we on the right? Are we on the right in the right movement here? Are we crazy? We don't ban them. We just simply say we mark it as a yes on their sheet. When they put with their name, we put it as a yes, and they sit separately with their families. They sit separately right now. For the most part, it's work for travel purposes, travel for work purposes, not vacation purposes. But we're certainly keeping an eye on the fact that other states around us, some of them are exploding.
Cynthia, you bring up something near and dear to my heart. So prior to the 4th of July, the CDC expressly stated on its website that they did not have any restrictions for domestic travel. Certainly for international travel, there are restrictions. Now, 4th of July just happened 3 weeks ago, and the recommendations have changed. The CDC has not expressly said you should not travel domestically, but they have cautioned against traveling to hotspots where there's clearly a trend showing an increased number of cases related to COVID. A company, an organization, a place of worship, any form of business can adopt a higher standard than what is currently been recommended. And in fact, here at Think, we've adopted a higher standard. So my recommendation going into the 4th of July weekend was what the CDC recommended. No specific travel restrictions, but we now know what has happened since the 4th of July. The Sun Belt region has exploded. The Midwest creeping up very quickly. And so the state of Nebraska is slowly increasing, ramping up. And so at this point, absolutely, hold fast, right? This storm is just getting started, and it is not going to get any better. You will get pushback. Do I get pushback? You bet. That's why I have an office and I get to close the door. And there are times when I go, Jesus, I'm going to need you right now. Otherwise, I'm going to say something that I'm going to have to pray for forgiveness for later. So, as leaders during this crazy year, you will need, if I could just divert just for a moment, you will need a group such as this for reinforcement that you are on the right path. Hold fast. This is not over. It feels like the rough spot, but it's not. And if I could just add in what we're doing here at Think as well, and I want to share this with you. In about 6 to 8 weeks, start of flu season. So you have got to be prepared. Do not wait to have a safety plan in mind. If I could encourage each of you to try to secure as many boxes of gloves and hand sanitizers and sprays and things like that as much as you can. Have a plan in place for supplies, for a process for your members if you are going to continue to hold in-person services. For those providing childcare services within the house of worship or using that facility, have a plan. We've got 6 to 8 weeks, folks, and then it's going to look different once again. And just remember that September is the start of flu season, but it typically gets worse November, December. And so that usually carries through, at least through January, sometimes through February. So be ready. The symptoms may look quite similar, and it will be very difficult for you to hold fast, but you are going to need to. It is, we are not through this by any means. So don't change your process. To respond to your question, don't change your process. Maintain a higher standard. Your congregation will thank you for it. At the end, you will, it's really tough for me to say this to you, but I just want to say this, and I'm positive you've already thought about this. Some of your members who are attending today, if they get sick and are not able to recover, they may not be with us in the future. And that's the truth. And that sounds awful to say, but we know that over 150,000 Americans have died unexpectedly because of a virus that in the medical community, we all initially thought this is a flu-like illness. It is not. We know that it is far more virulent. Hold a higher standard. I encourage you to. Beth. Any other questions? Things we
My
didn't
question's a little bit more about facilities. I'm right up the street from you at Rockbrook.
Oh,
I think if I went out on the pedestrian overpass, I could probably see your building. So I know your building and I know how it is and is not like my building and some of our other buildings. So I was just wondering, when you screen people coming in to think, where do you do it? Is it in the lobby? Is it outside? And do you screen everyone, even if they're just coming in from the pharmacy? Or how do you work that?
Thank you for asking, Jim. We screen everyone. We have limited the entrance to, you can only enter through one door. Everyone gets screened. Is everyone happy about being screened? No. Our providers have agreed to a single protocol. You must wear a mask when you are inside of this building. It does not matter if you're picking up glasses or if you're going to the pharmacy. If you insist on not wearing a mask, we are happy to direct you to the drive-through pharmacy. We will have your prescription ready. In the Rockbrook area, where there's a number of businesses spread throughout, it's helpful to have one consistent set of policies. With respect to screening inside, outside, so as you enter, there's a vestibule, and then you enter the interior of the building. In our vestibules, we have signs that say, please wear a mask. We offer masks to our patients and our visitors when they come in. We also offer hand sanitizer right there at the door. And then we ask the screening questions right there. There was, and this may come up for you if this is something you decide to implement in your place of worship or businesses, is asking the screening questions a HIPAA violation? Or so as a healthcare facility, we're bound by those rules. And so we're not asking, Susie Q if she has this health condition or that health condition. It's, do you have a fever? Do you have a cough? Do you have these symptoms? It's a generic question. In a non-healthcare setting, certainly I would defer you to your legal counsel for that, but you're protecting your business, and it is absolutely a good question just to verify with your legal folks that if a business chooses not to have folks in who are not wearing masks, I defer to you on that. But we absolutely do that with every single individual coming into this building.
You mentioned if somebody responded to the question in the affirmative, have an isolation area. For a Sunday service, the isolation area, was that in like the sanctuary, or was that someplace you piped it in, or would it be better simply to say, please check with your healthcare people, with your healthcare provider, and see if you're positive, or
I like your second answer, Dale. Thanks for asking that. So the isolation area, so in my church, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different entrances. And so now we can only come into one. And the isolation area is not in the sanctuary because we don't want that person anywhere near anybody else. But it is just a separate room that we had a couple of rooms. There are prayer rooms right as you walked into the building. So one of those was identified as an isolation area. And so that person, you know, if they would screen positive, would have on a mask, and if for some reason they were physically unable to walk right back out the door, because that's the ideal solution. Put a mask on, and just as you said very nicely, I'm sorry, based on your response, we would recommend that you check with your healthcare provider for possible COVID exposure, or whatever language you want to use. Instead of those folks who have already gained entrance to the building, who may be coughing, sneezing, my goodness, you appear rather ill, let's put a mask on, let's cover your mouth, get your scarf up or something, cover your nose and mouth. And so I also want to point out that wearing the mask like this is not appropriate. It's appropriate to cover the nose and mouth. I see a lot of folks wearing it like just over their mouth. So if you do have members in your congregation who are wearing their masks that way, I would encourage you to use, you know, there are lots of stock pictures online that I don't believe are copyrighted, that I would encourage you to put a sign up at your facilities. Please wear a mask, mask required, whatever language you want to use. But yes, hopefully that answered your question.
I have a question there, and I think very well that is where I see my doctor.
Thank you.
Dr. Tim Crowley, so very good service there. My question is about teenagers and young adults. They are questioning whether or not they're at risk of catching or could catch, or maybe not be carriers or that type of thing. Can you give us factual information on about young adults or teenagers or children as far as the catching COVID-19?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. We know that the group that seems to have the greatest growth are those under the age of 35 in general across the country. And so, yes, unlike the rest of us who have recognized our morbidity and mortality, our teenagers seem to think they are impervious to this. And so I think it is incumbent on us to provide education. Probably even before that, a tremendous amount of patience. Tremendous. I think double dose, quadruple dose, the patience that's needed to educate our young people in our community. They absolutely can get it, they can transmit it, they can be asymptomatic. They are subject just like the rest of us. So with respect to factual numbers, as you are aware, the Department of Health and Human Services does provide that information for us and updates that information regularly, but clearly those under 35 are growing quickly.
Any other questions for Dr.
I have
Gordon?
a quick one, Matt.
Yes, ma'am.
I was just wondering, Dr. Smith, what have you heard, or do you have any research regarding singing? That's been something Matt can tell you. Our church is a very singing church, and we're very full of tremendous musical talent, all of which has stopped pretty much. We've gone to in-person services, I think that was started in June, with very, very limited numbers. Everything's taped off. People are masked. We didn't even sing hymns for a while. We've now begun to sing one hymn. our director of music is an instructor at the local community college, Dr. Patrick Newell. And he's been very cognizant of all the regulations and the awareness. And of course, with what he does for a living, all the performing arts things now at the college will be virtual. That was just decided just in the last few weeks. So I'm wondering, what about singing hymn in church? If you're 6 foot away from a person, which the way we've taped things off, we are, I prefer to leave the mask on. Some people take it off. I just wonder what do you know about that, or research, whatever.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I would not recommend singing. So earlier, even with the mask, I gave a scenario that if a congregation under their leadership decided to do that with a mask on, you could still potentially spread. We know that wearing masks does reduce transmission from me to you, or from others to you and others. However, we also know in medical science, there was an article that came out, it's been several weeks, that showed with any sort of expression using your voice, there is a plume of respiratory droplets that exits the respiratory tract. We think it can go out farther than 6 feet. We think, we're not sure. We also are not sure how long it really hangs around in the air. So there's a lot of unknowns in that space. One of the things I would like to continue to suggest is you have a musical director with experience, and certainly based on your feedback, a tremendous amount of talent in your congregation. May I suggest that the musical director conduct a virtual session, either recording that, just as we do here on Zoom, recording that and then playing that back. There is something.
Yeah, and that's something we've been doing all along. Everything's been virtual. As far as the music, even our organist is still, it's all recorded. He's not there, even during the in-person service. That's
so
all.
I would not recommend the singing. There is something so fulfilling about attending services and being able to sing. I get it. I am frequently shrieking in the back, but it's my form of praise. So even though it's shrieking, that's right. But I would recommend not. This is such a hard time. The holidays are coming. We still want to celebrate. We are going to have to do this differently. I would also just urge you to even do a pulse survey of your congregation members. How are you doing? How's your mood? Are you feeling safe, secure? And that, because as the holidays approach and this isolation continues, you are going to find more of your parishioners reaching out to you with depression, anxiety, and other concerns, loneliness. And so I would truly offer no singing, continue virtual services, pulse survey your congregation, do a check to see how they're doing. Think of maybe other innovative ways to engage during the week. I'm sure you're already doing that. This is going to be a rough year for a myriad of reasons.
We are coming to our, give me 1 second, Dale, give me 1 second. We are coming to the hour. I promised Dr. Gordon we would keep it to an hour. So Dale, you get the last question for this time.
How much difference is there between singing and just reading, like treating the hymn like a poem and just reading it in unison with everybody's masked up? Is there a lot of difference?
You're still going to have respiratory droplets spread into the space. Even now talking, so we're all in our respective spaces by ourselves. When I have folks come into my office, my mask goes on. So it doesn't matter. It's the vocalization piece. There's still going to be respiratory droplets pushed into the air. So until there's a different recommendation, as you can tell, I'm pretty conservative, and I really, this is going to be tough. This is going to be tough, and I think we'll be hard pressed to find any one medical organization. Sorry, I've got to wave my arm for the light to come on here. I think you'll find it hard for any medical organization that will stand by a set of rules that says sing with or speak with in the coming months, because there's still so much we don't know. We're probably at least a year out before we have any real solution.
Okay, thank you.
My pleasure. I really appreciate all of you giving me the opportunity to spend time with you today. I hope you found it helpful. I'm always willing to answer questions. I do have some takeaways that I will prepare and send to Matt electronically. I'll try to leave Margot out of it. I will get those over to you, Matt, today. And I really enjoyed it. And please stay safe, all of you. And thank you so much for continuing to provide services. I really like my virtual services. I haven't been in my church's building in months, but I do log on virtually, and I encourage you to continue to do the same. And get your flu vaccine when it's available, please, all of you.
Perfect. All right. Thank you all. Have a blessed day. We'll talk to you all again soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye, everybody. Have a good day.
Welcome, Todd. Bye.